The Deathwatch is the Imperium's most dangerous secret. An elite force of space marines taken from their chapters, handed to the Inquisition, and sent to fight wars that no one else is allowed to know about. They study the alien instead of simply destroying it. They use weapons the Imperium considers forbidden, and they operate under a level of secrecy that makes accountability impossible. The system that keeps them fighting has a survival rate so brutal that only 1 in 20 ever comes home. Space Marines answer to their Primarchs and the Emperor. That has been the oldest rule in the Imperium for 10,000 years. The Inquisition holds no Primarch, carries no gene seed, and was never part of the Emperor's original design for the Adeptus Astartes. Yet the Inquisition commands its own force of Space Marines, because a military disaster so complete that it nearly destroys humanity's empire forced the Imperium to break its own rules. This system worked, but it also destroyed nearly everyone who served in it. Those who survived carried secrets they could never share, loyalties their brothers could never understand, and scars that no amount of honor could heal. One of those survivors was a former captain of the Ultramarines, falsely accused of corruption and handed over to the Inquisition for over a century of interrogation. When they finally cleared him, his old life was gone. He scraped the colors from his armor, buried his name, and entered the Deathwatch as a nameless warrior with nothing left to lose. His story is one of the most remarkable in the Watch's history, and we'll come back to him later. This is the full story of the Deathwatch, how it was created, how it fights, what it costs, and why the Imperium can't survive without it. During the Great Crusade and even through the dark times of the Horus heresy, alien races were not the primary concern. Orks were slaughtered in the trillions, the Eldar were barely surviving, and the Necrons slept in their tomb worlds. The Tyranids had not yet appeared, and there was no real need for a specialized alien hunting force when the standard Space Marine legions could handle the task alongside the Imperial Guard. By the time the Imperium had stabilized after the heresy, large demonic threats had the Grey Knights to contain them, but large alien threats of comparable scale had no equivalent answer. That gap nearly cost the Imperium everything when the War of the Beast erupted in the 32nd millennium. An Ork tyrant of immense power united the greenskin hordes into a single fighting force and drove them straight at Terra. This was not a typical invasion because the beast fielded weapons and tactics that rivaled anything the Imperium had seen since the Great Crusade. Ork attack moons, war machines so large they warped gravity around nearby planets, teleported into Imperial space and smashed aside every fleet sent to stop them. These were not crude asteroids strapped with engines, but weapons, platforms the size of small worlds, and the simple act of teleporting one near a planet caused devastation on the surface below before a single shot was fired. Entire chapters threw themselves at the greenskin advance and were ground to nothing. Traditional strategies, the kind that relied on massive armies and grinding losses, cost the Imperium world after world without slowing the enemy, and even combined chapter assaults could not break the advance. Terra itself lay in the shadow of an invasion force that seemed unstoppable. Lord Commander Courland, the sole surviving member of the Imperial Fists, and the newly elected leader of the Imperium's military, recognized that raw force alone could not win this war. As described in Watchers in Death, the last son of Dorn drew his inspiration from the Officio Assassinorum, where the Imperium's standard armies fought like a broadsword, swinging hard and absorbing punishment. The Lord Commander proposed a force that would fight like a knife, small and precise and aimed at the throat. Instead of matching the Orks with raw numbers, this new force would target greenskin leadership with cross-chapter kill teams operating behind enemy lines. If the head died, the body would fall apart. But the moment he proposed this plan, the political machinery of Terra turned against him. They saw a power grab, because the memory of the Horus heresy still loomed over every decision on Terra. Roughly 1,500 years earlier, the War Master Horus had united Space Marine legions under a single commander and nearly destroyed the Imperium from within. so the idea of one man controlling warriors drawn from every chapter triggered that same deep fear. The ruling council called the proposal monstrous and compared it to a coup designed to rebuild the old legions under a single warlord. This was not just a military debate, but a political crisis wrapped inside a war for survival, and the High Lords were reluctant to approve the formation of what they considered a dangerously powerful force, even with the Orks closing in on Terra itself. The Inquisition saw the same threat, but also spotted an opportunity. Inquisitors Veritas and Weenan didn't oppose the creation of this new force, and instead they positioned themselves inside it. They stated openly that the Deathwatch was political in its elements and deeply so in its effect, placing herself as a check against the Lord Commander's growing influence. Her counterpart operated alongside her with what the novel calls a clear belief in his entitlement to command, viewing this new force as a necessary tool for a dark age where the old methods of the Great Crusade no longer worked. The Inquisition's authority over the Deathwatch didn't begin as a command structure but as a containment, because they infiltrated its leadership to monitor its potential, to steer its direction, and to keep it pointed at the alien instead of at the Imperium's own power centers. From the very first missions, Inquisitors accompanied the kill teams not as observers but as directors, who aimed the blade toward specific goals, including the recovery of the Sisters of Silence. Corland insisted that the force he created was not the Inquisition's to command, but he was forced to rely on inquisitorial intelligence and logistics to make it function. The Grand Master of the Officio Assassinorum, Draken Vangerich, noted during this period that the more successful the Deathwatch became, the harder it would be to disband, and the Inquisition used that reality to their advantage. They turned a wartime alliance into a permanent institution. Without their involvement, the Deathwatch would have been dissolved the moment the war ended, because the High Lords would have seen to it, leaving the Imperium without a dedicated alien hunting force when the next great threat arrived. The first warriors to serve in this new force were drawn from the shattered remnants of chapters that had fought the beast on Ulanar, the Ork capital world. These were veterans who had already survived the worst the Greenskins could throw at humanity, and their first mission was to assault an Ork attack moon with nothing but a handful of kill teams. From the very beginning, the Deathwatch was built to do the impossible with too few warriors and was expected to succeed or die in the attempt. The first watch commander was a space wolf named Asgar Warfest, a wolf lord who had fallen to nearly every major engagement of the War of the Beast. He helped destroy the attack moon above Terra and set the command traditions the organization still follows today, and his appointment established an important rule. The Deathwatch would always be led by a space marine, not an inquisitor, and this was the compromise that made the arrangement work. After the war, Corland reached an agreement with the inquisitorial representatives to ensure the watch would fall under the jurisdiction of the Inquisition, while a warrior always served as its chapter master, calming the fears of the wider Senatorum Imperialis. The Inquisition provided direction and intelligence, while the Astartes provided the killing power and field leadership, a division of authority that has survived for 10,000 years. Before the permanent watch fortresses were established, the earliest kill teams operated from the strike cruiser Herald of Night, a mobile base that functioned under the joint direction of the chapter masters and the inquisitorial representatives who had helped create the force. It was a ship, not a fortress, and it answered to both sides of the arrangement, a physical symbol of the compromise that defined the Deathwatch from its first day of existence. However, the political compromise of the Beast's era was only the first layer, because centuries later a separate, founding event locked the bond in place even farther. A gathering of Inquisitor lords known as the Apocryphon Conclave met on Orphite 4 and debated for years about the threats facing humanity. The Deathwatch core rulebook details that the senior Inquisitors present were united in one belief. Sooner or later, alien races would pose a threat to the Imperium's very existence. Some demanded the cleansing of all alien life from the galaxy. Others argued for truces with races like the Eldar. and still others feared the awakening of ancient godlike beings or invasions from beyond the galaxy's edge, warnings that would prove terrifyingly correct in the millennia ahead. The disagreements built up over years until the senior inquisitors resolved to create a permanent chapter to which almost no limits would apply in the fight against the alien. To confirm their decision, the Inquisitor Lords summoned chapter masters of the Codex Astartes and presented them with a vision of a future in which humanity either died at the hands of aliens or lingered on in their slavery. The assembled chapter masters heard the threats, debated them overnight, and by sunrise the following day presented their decision. The majority agreed to support the Ordo Xenos by providing their finest warriors, and those who could not attend the swearing of the oath took it later. Since then, it has been an honor for many chapters to send their chosen veterans to the Deathwatch, and a binding obligation for all. This was not a brotherhood born from shared glory or the legacy of a gene father, but a political agreement between two of the most powerful institutions in the Imperium, and its effects would reach every loyalist chapter in existence. The result of this pact defines the organization to this day. The Watch serves as the Chamber Militant of the Ordo Xenos, the branch of the Inquisition dedicated to the detection and destruction of the alien. Just as the Grey Knights serve the Ordo Malleus against demonic threats, and the Sisters of Battle serve the Ordo Hereticus against the Imperium's internal enemies. Every Deathwatch battle brother wears the stylized letter I on their silver left shoulder guard to mark their service to the alien-hunting Ordos, and their missions are directed not by the wishes of a traditional chapter master but by inquisitors whose primary loyalty lies with the state. Their victories go unrecorded except in the sealed archives of the Inquisition, and even their existence remains largely unknown across the wider Imperium. The oath-sworn tithe makes all of this permanent. As published in the Codex Supplement Deathwatch, every Loyalist chapter is expected to send veteran warriors to serve the long vigil, and this tithe is not a request but a binding commitment maintained across centuries. Under the Ultimaris Decree, even newly created Primaris chapters are now bound to this tithe forever. Some chapters, like the Crimson Fists and the Mantis Warriors, greet these appointments with pride, while others, like the Dark Angels and the Black Templars, view the obligation with suspicion, believing the Inquisition to be corrupt or a threat to their independence. Even so, these chapters still send veterans, because no brotherhood may refuse without consequences. There's no need to train recruits or accept beginners, because every warrior who arrives is already a proven hero. The command structure that grew from this arrangement has no equal anywhere else in the Imperium, and the level of power it created to individual warriors would shock even other Space Marines. At the center sits the Watch Fortress, each one an independent domain under the charge of a Watch Commander. These commanders, usually carrying the rank of Watchmaster, hold a level of trust so extreme that they are granted access to the private archives of the Inquisition, a privilege denied to other chapter masters entirely. Even the most powerful Lord Inquisitors treat Watchmasters with respect, recognizing the weight of the burden these warriors carry. The sole and final authority within a Watch Fortress is the Watchmaster, and the rulebook notes that Inquisitors who have challenged that authority have paid for this mistake with their lives. Yet, that authority exists within a system designed by the Inquisition and for the Inquisition, which meant the Watchmaster's power was always conditional. The coordinates of places like Watch Fortress Damaroth are classified at the highest level, known only to those pledged to a lifetime of service. Even temporarily assigned Space Marines are not told exactly where they are stationed, because the Imperium does not simply hide these locations from its enemies, but from its own warriors. Some fortresses were converted from the ruins of alien civilizations, their former inhabitants destroyed and their histories erased, which meant the Watch did not merely defend against the alien, but built its command posts on the graves of species it had wiped from existence. Each Watch commander holds the power to put entire sectors to the torch and destroy whole species without oversight from traditional military leaders. Innovation, which is considered close to a crime against the faith in the wider Imperium, is openly encouraged within the Watch because the threats they face demand constant change. They ignore the rigid limits of the Codex Astartes, the rulebook that governs nearly every other Space Marine Brotherhood. Their numbers remain officially undisclosed, though estimates from across the sources suggest the Deathwatch operates with roughly 3,000 to 6,000 active operatives at any given time. This is a fraction of the Imperium's total Astartes strength, but disproportionately lethal for their size. They have no single home world. The largest fortress in the Imperium, Thalassa Prime, is an entire world given to the Watch forever by the Ultramarines, serving as both a training center and the central base for operations across the Segmentum Ultima. And it was here that the current Watchmaster oversaw the integration of Primaris Marines into the organization's ranks after the opening of the Great Rift. That Watchmaster was Mortali, personally respected by Marneus Calgar of the Ultramarines, a relationship that reflected just how tightly the organization's leadership was tied to the most powerful chapters in the Imperium. He championed the Malleus tactic for combating Xenos and Ultramar, and his oversight of the Primaris transition ensured that the Watch adapted to the new generation of warriors faster than nearly any other institution in the Imperium. Most Watch fortresses host an Inquisitor of the Chamber, an agent of the Ordo Xenos who serves as ambassador and coordinator between the Inquisition's wider strategy and the Watch's operations. The Chamber of Vigilance serves as the War Council where the Watchmaster and the Inquisitor discuss new intelligence and decide how to respond to threats. This is not a military chain of command in the traditional sense, but a partnership where the Inquisition provides the direction and the Watch provides the killing power. Petitions for aid from Ordo Xenos agents are rarely refused, a level of cooperation found in no standard Astartes Brotherhood. In rare cases, a Watch Fortress commander has not been a warrior at all, but a Lord Inquisitor, and in other cases, Deathwatch Battle Brothers have led the forces of the Inquisition itself. Each Watch Fortress typically houses 5 watch companies, each commanded by a watch captain and his lieutenants. Most companies are smaller than what the Codex Astartes prescribes, usually consisting of no more than 50 Space Marines divided into 4 or 5 kill teams. Despite their small size, these veterans carry the fighting power of a full standard company, thanks to their combat skill, hatred of the alien, and specialized weapons. A chaplain remains a chaplain. A tech marine still maintains vehicles and weapons, and librarians and apothecaries continue their duties. But the way these specialists work together is shaped entirely by the alien threat they're about to face. Beyond the fortresses, the Watch maintains a vast network of smaller watch stations scattered across every sector of the Imperium. Connecting these outposts were the Dark Hunters, specialized high-speed warp-capable vessels tasked with traveling between stations to collect intelligence and transport it back to the fortress archives. Every watch station was also fitted with self-destruct systems, because the stations sat unmanned for decades at a time and were vulnerable to capture. If breached, the station was designed to erase all traces of its secrets, rather than allow them to fall into alien or traitor hands. In the Jericho Reach alone, stations with designations like Arcus, Balerius, Castile, Midale, Ether, and Cressid served as forward observation posts and early warning systems, and these are not safe places to be. Watch Station Cressid had a sleeping warp creature trapped inside its walls, which meant the warriors stationed there had to keep their psychic defenses up at all times just to stay alive, while Watch Station Cleha had been infected by a dark mechanicum force that corrupted the station's systems into something barely controllable. Each station was a tiny outpost on the edge of nothing, crewed by warriors who knew that if the aliens came, they would be the first to fight and probably the last. But the Watch did not just occupy dangerous places. It turned the warriors themselves into something their home chapters would barely recognize. When a warrior joins the Watch, the change is both physical and symbolic. He arrives at the gathering point alone, separated from his original squad, and his armor is painted black. A black so complete it strips away the collars of his old chapter. Only a single shoulder plate remains in the original Brotherhood's collars, worn on the right shoulder to honor his origins. because painting over the chapter symbol entirely is forbidden and considered a sign of bad luck. The left arm and shoulder are cast in silver and stamped with the inquisitorial eye, and the armor is further decorated with purity symbols and sacred icons from the warrior's parent chapter. The space wolves bear carved symbols and talismans. The blood angels carry teardrops, and the dark angels wear pendants shaped like winged swords. He takes an oath of binding so complete that he is forbidden from sharing what he experiences, even with his own gene brothers back home. That silence would follow him for the rest of his life, and for most it would cost them more than any battle wound. He becomes something new, not quite his old self and not quite free, but a weapon forged from the combined traditions of 100 chapters and aimed by the Inquisition at the alien. The Watch exists because the Imperium needed a weapon that no single chapter could provide, but the reason it survived and the reason it became permanent was that the Inquisition made sure it could never be taken away from them, and the warriors who now served it were about to discover something far more difficult than following inquisitorial orders. The Deathwatch had its structure, its fortresses, and its mandate from the Inquisition, but none of that mattered without the warriors who filled its ranks, and those warriors did not come willingly or easily. The Deathwatch does not recruit, but only borrows. Every battle brother in its ranks is a veteran taken from another chapter, sent to serve a term that could last a single mission or the rest of his life. These warriors arrive from different worlds, trained in different combat styles, carrying different beliefs, and bound by centuries of history that often puts their home brotherhoods at bitter odds with one another. The Inquisition takes them, strips them of their old squads, and forces them into kill teams where they must fight as a single unit or die apart. The tension that comes from forcing these warriors together is not a problem the system failed to solve. It is how the system was designed to work. Few squads show this as clearly as Talon Squad. As revealed in the novel Deathwatch, its leader, designated Alpha, is Leandro Carras, a librarian from the Death Specters, a chapter known for their bone-white skin, red eyes, and deep ties to the psychic arts. Alongside the Psyker leader stands Maximian Voss, an Imperial Fist who handles heavy weapons and demolitions. He was short for a space marine but built like a boulder, with a physical density and stubbornness that embodied the bloodline of Rogel Dorn in every engagement. His build was not accidental, because the Imperial Fist had been notably shorter than his brothers since his elevation, and the offhanded comments that followed drove him to compensate the only way he knew how. While the other Marines meditated or drilled combat forms in their off hours, he trained his body with a single-minded obsession that forced the Tech Marines to refit his armor multiple times to accommodate his growing mass. Eventually, his captain ordered him to stop, a moment that said more about the Imperial Fist's tolerance for excess than about Voss himself. And by the time he reached the Watch, his frame was so dense that even other Astartes remarked on it. But raw strength meant nothing if the warriors standing next to you wanted you dead. The team's close-quarters fighter is Zephyr Zed of the Raven Guard, a warrior built for speed and silence who carries lightning claws and strikes before the enemy even registers his presence. Its designated marksman is Ignacio Solarian, an ultramarine trained in the precise and disciplined methods of Gilliman's sons. Rounding out the active squad is Darian Roth, an exorcist from a chapter that specializes in resisting the warp, whose true role within the team is far darker than his brothers realize. Held in reserve is Chiron, a Lamenter's dreadnought, an ancient warrior sealed inside a massive walking war machine. His size limits where he can be sent, but his firepower makes up for it. Each of these warriors is a proven hero in his own right, but the Inquisition did not assemble them because they worked well together. It assembled them because their differences make the team deadlier than any single chapter squad could ever hope to be. The Inquisitor who controls Talon describes them as Ordo assets whose lives are spent only where their specific talents can achieve results that standard units would fail to accomplish. A kill team is not a brotherhood of equals, but a precision tool assembled from parts that were never designed to fit together. and the tension between these parts is constant and sometimes violent. That tension begins before the first mission starts. Solarian openly sneered at Karas's leadership from the moment they met, because he considered the Death Spectres to be third tier and called the Librarian Witchblood since his chapter originated from outside the Imperium's formal boundaries. He refused to grip wrists with him, and the resentment eventually escalated into a confrontation where the Alpha overloaded his own neural implant to throw the Ultramarine against a wall and reassert command. The physical appearance of certain brotherhoods deepened these divides further, since the Death Spectre's bone-white skin and glowing red eyes caused other Marines to stare with suspicion and keep their distance even in shared spaces like the dining halls of a watch fortress. They were not the only chapter whose genetics made them outsiders among their own allies. A black dragon named Tayras served in the watch with bone horns growing from his skull, a mutation unique to his chapter, and even his Deathwatch brothers looked at those growths as something wrong rather than a feature of the warrior standing beside them. A Bloodraven named Gensis Notorian carried a different burden, because his chapter's origin had been lost to history, and that gap in lineage weighed on him while he served alongside warriors who could trace their bloodlines directly to Primarchs like Guilliman and Sanguinius. Where the Death Spectres and Black Dragons were mistrusted for what they were, the Bloodravens were looked down on for what they could not prove, and this was not something kept quiet. It was open distrust, and it followed these warriors into every mission they fought. The insults often escalated into violence. As detailed in the book Shadowbreaker, a howling griffin named Gedian physically attacked a member of the Executioners the moment they met at a Watch Fortress gathering, because during the Badab Wars the Executioners had torn through the griffin's ranks, and that blood debt did not vanish simply because both warriors now wore the same black armor. The team's Alpha had to intervene with a raw psychic force just to prevent them from killing each other before their first operation together. These kinds of clashes played out across every watch fortress in the galaxy, and the rivalries ran deep enough to shape history. Imperial fists frequently clashed with space wolves. One side viewed the other as reckless wolf cubs whose childish insults endangered the mission, while the Sons of Rus saw that same caution as cowardice. The Dark Angels and the Space Wolves carried an ancient grudge dating back to the Horus heresy, when their Primarchs, Lionel Johnson and Lehman Russ, came to blows in a feud that was never fully healed. Even the White Scars and the Raven Guard have clashed, though those two chapters eventually found a way to work together. The Iron Hands and the Ultramarines, despite both being strict and disciplined chapters, held enough differences in doctrine that they would never be fully comfortable fighting side by side, and the Blood Angels were not fond of the Storm Wardens, since the latter had once aided them without being asked, an act the Sons of Sanguinius considered unwelcome. Every kill team was a potential flashpoint, and the Watch commanders knew it, but the grudges between warriors were only half the problem, because the missions themselves made everything worse. The sources document a Marine malevolent who suggested leaving behind an injured Imperial Fist and a Dead Star Phantom because they slowed them down, a coldness that the squad's Salamander found so disrespectful it nearly fractured the entire team. In another mission, a Crimson Fist watch captain's personal hatred of Orks blinded his battlefield judgment, causing him to ignore the surgical strike advice of a Dark Angel and leading directly to the death of a battle brother. Even the Blood Angels required special attention, because their gene seed carries the flaw of the Black Rage. In one documented case, an Angel's Sanguine librarian named Ashok fell to the Rage during a mission against Tyranids, slaughtering 3 of his own brothers before he could be brought under control. He was confined to a fortress until he mastered the curse, and only after passing every trial was he allowed to join the Watch, where he later survived a fight against 3 Tyranid zoanthropes at once, a feat no librarian had ever accomplished. His story was not one of failure, but of a warrior who conquered the very gene flaw that defined his bloodline and turned it into a weapon the Watch could use. A separate librarian, named Leandro Carras, served for 6 years as the commander of a kill team. driven by a lifelong ambition to bring glory to his chapter through the Watch. His psychic powers came with a physical cost, because whenever he drew on the warp, a crack split open across his brow and functioned as a third eye, closing only when his abilities were no longer in use. Through that eye, he could read minds and project his spirit across vast distances, talents that made him one of the Watch's most valued intelligence assets. The blood raven named Gensis Nitorian carried a darker origin, since his abilities had first shown themselves during the slaughter of his parents by Orks, and the anger he unleashed in that moment, tearing dozens of greenskins apart with raw violence, had never fully gone away. Every alien that crossed his path received the same storm of warp-born rage that had consumed the Orks who killed his family. The Black Templars presented a unique challenge, because they hated Psykers so deeply that before a librarian could even be placed on their kill team, the warrior had to go through days of fasting and prayer, just to stop himself from attacking the Psyker on sight. Space Wolves frequently abandoned standard battle formations to charge straight at the enemy, a habit that forced every other member of the team to adjust their plans on the spot. The Space Wolves' relationship with the Watch carried its own institutional friction, since on at least one occasion the chapter sent an entire pack of blood claws, raw recruits barely past their initiation, to serve in the Watch. Whether this was a deliberate insult, a test of the Watch's training system, or simply the Wolves' idea of a joke, the result forced the Watch's instructors to process warriors who had none of the veteran experience the organization was designed to receive. A son of Rus, in the middle of a disciplined ultramarine firing line, would suddenly break ranks and sprint toward the enemy, leaving gaps that the rest of the squad had to fill or risk being overwhelmed. As documented in the novel Deathwatch, Watch fortresses built systems to contain this reality. A central pancratium served as a close combat training area where blood spilled is blood honored, allowing warriors to vent their aggression under controlled conditions. Some rivalries, particularly those involving Dark Angels or Minotaurs, resulted in unauthorized fights and brothers attacking each other before they could be stopped. To deal with this, the Watch developed a system where disputes were settled through knife fights that ended at first blood, a way to sort out who had earned respect without losing a warrior. If persuasion failed, harsher tools waited. The novel describes the penance box, a coffin-like chamber where a Marine who could not set aside his grudges was forced to experience recordings of his own chapter brothers being slaughtered, not as a distant observer, but through a device that made him feel the pain firsthand. The Watch Council made sure no Marine was shown footage of his own brotherhood being killed unless he was specifically being punished, as that level of cruelty was considered too extreme for standard conditioning. What made these mechanisms necessary was not just the friction between brothers, but the nature of the authority that governed them. In the rulebook, the most significant difference between the Watch and any standard chapter was that its missions were directed by the Ordo Xenos. Every kill team existed to serve the Inquisition's strategic objectives, not the traditions of any single brotherhood, which meant every grudge, every rivalry, and every cultural clash had to be pushed aside for goals set by an institution that most chapters viewed with suspicion at best and open hatred at worst. The discipline systems were not just about keeping warriors from killing each other, but about forcing proud sons of Primarchs to accept orders from an organization that had no Primarch, no gene seed, and no claim to their loyalty beyond a political agreement made thousands of years before any of them were born. The Pancratium and the Penance Box existed because the alternative was a force that tore itself apart before ever reaching the enemy. Beyond physical discipline, every new arrival underwent intense mental conditioning. Through specialized procedures, each warrior's mind was filled with detailed combat data on every alien species the Watch had ever faced, including every subvariant and regional mutation. The recordings did not just teach the Marines how to kill aliens, but showed him what it looked like when aliens killed Space Marines. Thousands of recordings of battle brothers being torn apart, dissolved, burned alive, and consumed played through the warrior's mind while he sat locked in a restraining chair, unable to look away. The conditioning was so intense that it had become standard practice to physically lock the Marines down during the process, because the recordings drove them into states of such anger that they would otherwise attack anything nearby. The intent was to forge hatred of the alien so deep that it overwhelmed every other grudge the Marine carried. And after watching enough recordings of brothers dying at alien claws, the Raven Guard standing next to him in the mess hall started to seem a lot more tolerable. The process served a dual purpose. It taught the warrior how to kill and survive every known species, and it reframed the alien as the true enemy over any chapter rivalry. Chief Librarian Loshane provided the reasoning for why the Inquisition deliberately assembled these unstable squads. He explained that the conflicts of personality between warriors from rival chapters were not a problem to be solved but a feature to be used, because the differences allowed a kill team to employ the element of surprise and the unexpected in ways that a squad drawn from a single chapter, trained in a single doctrine, could never achieve. In other words, the friction was the point. A team that thought the same way was predictable, but a team that argued, adapted, and fought through its own internal divisions was not. The proof came in the field. During the mission described in the book Headhunted, Talon breached the command bridge of an Ork warship with such coordinated speed that the entire lower floor was cleared in the time it took to draw 3 breaths. Voss focused on total destruction of his targets, while Zed moved through the enemy like a ghost, killing before anyone could react. Despite their personal hatreds, they served one another without hesitation, and Karas used his psychic abilities to catch Roth during a 200-meter fall on a collapsing staircase, even though the exorcist had just addressed him with open contempt. In the heat of combat, they shouted not for the Deathwatch, but the names of their gene fathers, Dorn and Gilliman, as their battle cries. The aggression of a space wolf combined with the unbreakable discipline of an Imperial fist, and the white scars of speed on the attack merged with the Raven Guard's ability to reach any position undetected. The combination of strengths that would never appear in a single chapter squad was what made the Watch the deadliest small unit fighting force in the Imperium, because they served the Watch but fought as sons of the blood that made them. Some warriors came to the Watch already carrying reputations that crossed chapter boundaries. Brother Captain Artemis of the Mortifactors was one such figure. The Mortifactors were a chapter built around the worship of death and the honoring of their ancestors, their bone-white skull helmets and grim rituals unsettling even to other Space Marines. He rose through their ranks as a warrior of exceptional instinct, carrying with him an extraordinary ability to detect the presence of alien organisms, a gift that went beyond training. His career in the Watch made him one of the most decorated kill team leaders, and his personal belief became the squad's operating principle. The mission is more important than our survival. He would later lead the assassination of the Overfiend of Octarius, a feat that cemented his name among the greatest operatives the organization had ever produced. But that mission would also set off a chain of consequences the Watch never intended. Even legendary captains from the most respected chapters found themselves humbled by the Watch. Uriel Ventress, a captain of the Ultramarines 4th Company, served a tour in the Deathwatch and returned as a changed warrior. He had already proven himself one of the finest officers in Gilliman's gene line, but the Watch exposed him to methods and compromises that challenged the rigid honor code of his chapter. And his service was another example of how the organization reshaped even the most accomplished Marines, forcing them to accept the cold thinking of the Inquisition. A notable Watch captain from the Imperial Fist named Bannon served alongside the Ordo Xenos during the wars against High Fleet Leviathan, pulling off feats that others considered impossible, including capturing an Eldar warrior alive. When his team's position was swarmed by Tyranids, and a Thunderhawk arrived for extraction, the Imperial Fist insisted on being the last Marine to board. As he hung from the extraction rope, a Tyranid grabbed his leg, and without hesitation, the Watch captain cut his own rope and fell back into the swarm with nothing but a combat knife, choosing death over putting his brothers at risk. His squad was later taken over by an Ultramarine captain who led them to a victory over a hive fleet by poisoning the creature's Norn Queen, a feat that showed how one kill team's composition could shift and adapt even after losing its most valued members. Keeping this explosive mix together fell to leaders who understood that their job was less about strategy and more about managing killers. Watch Sergeant Cool emphasized that the weakness of one is the weakness of all, deliberately observing team friction to test whether the Alpha could correct for that weakness. Leading a kill team meant managing what the novels call apex predators, who smell weakness like blood in the air, and watch captains went further. Ska Mordentot admitted to using his own squad as bait to lure the Eldar into a trap without telling the warriors they had reinforcements waiting. He justified the deception by arguing that the alien had 1,000 ways to read knowledge from a Space Marine's mind, so the team had to believe themselves defeated for the ambush to work. Even the chaplains played a role in keeping warriors in line. Chaplain Ortan Cassius of the Ultramarines, one of the most ancient members of the Watch at nearly 400 years old, had fought in some of the largest battles against Tyranids and Gene Stealers, including the defense of Macragge alongside Marnea's Calgar when Hive Fleet Behemoth struck Ultramar. His body was so badly damaged in that engagement that his limbs and organs had to be replaced with mechanical components, and even those could not fully repair him. Since then, the veteran chaplain had become one of the organization's most respected warriors, and his role went beyond spiritual guidance, because he was described as his battle brother's keeper, guarding the spiritual well-being of a diverse group and forcing warriors to set aside narrow boundaries to serve the Emperor's family as a whole. Not every ancient warrior carried that same wisdom, and some of the Watch's oldest soldiers proved that centuries of service did not always produce patience. A dreadnought from the Imperial Fists named Shabjak served in the Watch with a temper so dangerous that he had, on more than one occasion, slaughtered allied Imperial Guard units during battles when his anger got ahead of his judgment. He would not have been accepted into the organization at all if it were not for his raw combat skill, and he spent much of his time between engagements insisting that the Space Marines of his era were 100 times better than the modern generation. The Watch tolerated him because he was effective, but his presence was a reminder that the ancient warriors sealed inside dreadnought coffins did not always come out of the millennia with their minds in one piece. When words and spiritual guidance failed, Watch captains turned to harsher disciplines. Warriors who endangered a team's covert status through reckless action faced physical punishment, severe enough to remind even a superhuman soldier that the Watch's authority was absolute. The leadership structure above the kill teams carried its own dysfunction, since Giannis Broden, an Alpha-designated scimitar, was described as aggressive and arrogant, treating subordinate squads as pieces on a board, and threatening to hold other team leaders personally responsible for any slips in discipline. The system that forced rival chapters to cooperate did not always produce good leaders, because it sometimes produced power-hungry commanders who used the Watch's authority to feed their own egos. The chaplain was not just a spiritual leader, but the enforcer of unity in an organization built on division. Despite all of that pressure, these warriors never stopped being who they were, because the Watch could reshape a Marine's purpose, but it could not erase where he came from. They kept their chapter icon on the right shoulder and carried personal keepsakes from home. Karaz carried Arkman, a forced sword once laid at the feet of the Golden Throne by the founder of his brotherhood. A space wolf named Gartrand carried Hjormir, a chainsword passed down since the days of Layman Russ, and he refused to replace its chipped teeth because doing so would offend the spirit of his Fenrisian heritage. Others preserved their heritage through words rather than objects, since Darian Roth frequently quoted unknown sacred writings and battle texts from his own chapter, passages drawn from works like the Chronicles of Uranos and the Fourth Book of Toul, reciting them aloud as though the oral tradition itself was an artifact he carried in place of a sword. Trophy rooms line the quarters of Watch fortresses, displaying the kills of brothers who served centuries before. The organization demanded loyalty but did not erase identity, because it layered a new one on top and forced the warrior to carry both, never fully belonging to either. The librarian admitted privately that Astartes' life seemed far less complicated among one's own chapter brothers, and longed for the day he could return to his homeworld. That longing was shared by nearly every warrior who put on the black, because they served the Inquisition, fought alongside rivals, and carried the weight of two brotherhoods at once. But what none of them fully understood when they arrived was that the kill team's greatest challenge would not be learning to trust each other. The Imperium of Man teaches the simple rule about the alien: hate it, destroy it, and never try to understand it. The third book of Indoctrinations lays this out in 5 words that every Imperial citizen is expected to follow. The Xenos is unclean, impure, and hated, and the only proper response is to see it cleansed and purged. For most space brotherhoods, this is more than enough. You see the alien, you kill the alien, and there is nothing else worth knowing. But the Deathwatch cannot afford that simplicity, and the tension between what the Watch needs to know and what the Imperium says it should know defines everything about how this organization fights. The novel Shadowbreaker states that the Watch Council remains split between 2 camps. On one side stands the purist, warriors who believe every trace of alien existence must be destroyed and who refuse to touch Xenos technology or even learn alien languages, regardless of the battlefield advantage that knowledge might provide. On the other side stands the realistic view, best expressed by the master of the Librarius, Marnus Loshane, who argued that because mankind faced its darkest days since the Horus heresy, the Watch had to embrace every weapon, every opportunity to survive. The realists have won that argument in practice even if the debate never ends, and the Watch maintains a secret collection of data on alien species hidden in vaults, guarded by what the lore calls dreaded sentinels. This information is so dangerous that its very existence violates Imperial law, and yet every Watch fortress in the galaxy depends on it. The conditioning described earlier taught every warrior how to kill every known alien species, but that was combat knowledge, drilled into muscle memory and reflex. The deeper forbidden knowledge, the kind that could save the Imperium or destroy the mind of anyone who carried it, lived in places most Marines were never allowed to enter. Sealed vaults hold ancient books, data crystals, and memory banks filled with information that would be considered an outright crime against the faith anywhere else, and only librarians are trusted with the access codes because they are judged strong enough to withstand the mind-breaking secrets inside. Each visit carries a risk, since whispered voices of long-dead alien minds reach out to every psyker who enters, offering forbidden power and terrible secrets. In the Jericho Reach, the greatest of these repositories takes the concept to an entirely different level. The Omega Vault, housed deep within Watch Fortress Ariok, is a massive system of ancient mechanisms, catacombs, and chambers at the heart of the fortress. Its sole entrance is a door 40 meters high, protected by massive armor plates, energy shields, and adamantium, engraved with the symbols of the Watch and ancient Terran markings, surrounding an image of the Emperor defeating a great serpent. An inscription reads, "Truth is the last fortress." Every new brother entering the Watch swears an oath of vigilance beneath those words, and the vault unlocks itself in response to specific alien threats, releasing ancient weapons, coded data, or strange artifacts to assist the Watch at critical moments. No one fully understands the mechanism behind these openings, because the central repository is linked to reports from Watch stations across the Jericho Reach, and it responds to some alien invasions while ignoring others entirely. What the Vault has released over the centuries has changed the course of wars, and what it still holds may change the fate of the galaxy. Throughout history, the Omega Vault has released everything from devastating weapons to maps of alien movements to a single ancient psychic messenger, preserved in a frozen sleep chamber who, upon being awakened, sent one brief message and then crumbled to dust, so ancient that he completed his final mission across the span of millennia. Secret journals of the Watch have been discovered, stored in electronic form within the Vault's ancient machines, revealing that the organization possesses weapons and knowledge it has not yet earned the right to use. According to the Deathwatch core rulebook, at the heart of the Vault sits a separate underground chamber containing what is believed to be the Watch's chief secret, an ancient pathogen that the lore describes as capable of killing any alien species while remaining harmless to humans. But who created it and why remains unknown. Whether this pathogen truly works as described or is simply one more mystery inside a vault full of mysteries, its existence reflects just how far the Watch's founders went to prepare for a war they knew would never end. The vault was confirmed to have been built by humans, and recently its mechanisms opened on their own, possibly triggered by chaos or Tyranid activity. Some locks that have been sealed for centuries are now beginning to release, and no one knows what will happen when all the locks are finally opened. Even the apothecaries carry a hidden mission. Beyond their role as medics, they hold a duty wrapped in utmost secrecy, because they must recover biological samples from alien bodies during combat, including toxins, bioacids, and nerve poisons, and send them directly to the Ordo Xenos so that the Inquisition can develop better methods of extermination. Their medical insights are turned toward inflicting the greatest possible biological damage during engagements, converting medical knowledge into a weapon. One of the most notable Deathwatch apothecaries, a warrior named Kraegor Than, earned his place by single-handedly cleansing an entire planet of a species called the Thazim that had been immune to normal weapons. He developed specialized toxins that killed them, and once accepted into the Watch, he was assigned to a research program focused on developing viral weapons against the Tyranids. He spent years collecting genetic material and testing toxins under field conditions, but the Tyranids adapted so quickly that no poison proved permanent. So his plan eventually focused on finding fresher specimens from beyond the Imperium's borders, where the organism's genetic material had not yet been altered by contact with human defenders. This obsession with studying the enemy shows in their weapons and every round they fire, because the Watch does not just know how to kill every alien species in the galaxy, it has built a weapon specifically designed to do it. The Watch maintains a range of special-issue ammunition no other Brotherhood possesses, each type designed to destroy a specific kind of alien. Hellfire rounds contain a reservoir of bioreactive acid tailored to dissolve alien tissue from the inside out, firing thousands of corrosive needles into the target on impact. Kraken bolts use an adamantium core to punch through the heaviest armor at extended range, while Dragonfire bolts explode in bursts of burning gas to kill enemies hiding behind cover. Vengeance rounds use an unstable magnetic core that tears targets apart at the molecular level, and Metal Storm frag shells detonate seconds before impact, showering the victim in fragments. D-Revenant shells are built specifically to stop Necrons from putting themselves back together after being destroyed, while Tempest bolts release a burst of electrical energy that shuts down alien war machines and can even cripple starships. The list continued further. Bane bolts, developed over the entire lifetime of Archmagister Aurexia, were considered the perfect round. A single shot placed at center mass could kill any target. Inertial thermonuclear rounds left craters where their targets had stood, and thermal penetrating rounds burned through the heaviest plating from the inside out. Every conceivable method of killing had been distilled into a projectile small enough to fit in a magazine, because every bolt round in the Watch is a tiny masterpiece of war, handcrafted and blessed 3 times over to kill a specific species. The Deathwatch bolter itself is produced to a standard far beyond regular Astartes weapons, fitted with optical upgrades to detect species that blend into their environments, and equipped with sound suppressors to extend the time between the first shot and the moment the enemy identifies where the fire is coming from. Special adapters allow a warrior to switch between ammunition types at the flick of a switch, selecting the perfect round for whatever target appears. Deathwatch shotguns are larger caliber than standard and carry their own set of specialized shells, including worm's breath rounds that convert the shotgun into a makeshift flamethrower. The balefire gun pushed the flamethrower concept into territory that bordered on the nuclear, because running on highly refined and radioactive promethium, it combined radiation and flame into a single weapon that ensured even the most resilient organisms, particularly orcs, stayed dead after being hit. It was not gentle on the local environment, but the Watch had never prioritized environmental preservation over extermination. Frag cannons are normally mounted on dreadnoughts, but the Watch modified them into handheld versions that a single Marine could carry. The Infernus Heavy Bolter takes it further by combining a heavy bolter with a built-in flamethrower, giving one warrior enough firepower to hold a corridor against an entire swarm. For confined operations inside space hulks or cramped alien tunnel networks, the Watch issued the Hesh Pattern Bolter, a stripped-down and miniaturized variant designed for spaces where a standard weapon could not be brought to bear. At the opposite extreme, the Stalker pattern fitted the standard bolt gun with an extended barrel and audio suppressor, converting it into a sniper platform capable of eliminating alien commanders from distances that conventional weapons could not reach. Heavy Thunder Hammers, larger and more devastating than the standard variant, were issued to warriors tasked with cracking open the heaviest alien war machines, while graviton guns distorted local gravity fields to crush targets under their own weight. Plasma volley guns, issued exclusively to Deathwatch veterans, delivered sustained volleys of superheated plasma that could melt through ranks of armored Xenos in seconds. But the Watch's ranged weapons were only half of their killing power, because what they carried into close combat was even more disturbing. Their close combat weapons matched this level of specialization. The Xenophase blade uses a phasic plasma field derived from Necron technology and refined by the Adeptus Mechanicus, capable of phasing out of reality to pass through armor entirely and slice the flesh beneath. The Thief of Secrets is a power sword that tastes the blood of alien races and uses internal biological analysis cells to adjust its killing power against whatever species it strikes. And the Tome of Ectoclades is a reference book bound in alien skin that lists the specific weakness of every creature described in its pages. The Clavis, carried by Watchmasters, is a device from the Dark Age of technology that contains machine spirits capable of taking control of Imperial or alien machinery alike. The Watch also uses Guardian Spears, weapons normally reserved exclusively for the Custodes, a fact that the organization is keen to keep quiet, since the Emperor's personal guardians would not appreciate learning their equipment was being shared. The Watch's specialized collection of weapons extended further into tools designed for specific combat problems. The Osseous Key was a variant of the Clavis carved from the bones of Imperial Fist heroes, capable of blocking any doorway and disrupting the machine spirits of alien war machines. Stasis grenades trapped enemies in combat stasis fields, allowing the Watch to capture live specimens for study without risking close-quarters combat against creatures that could kill a space marine in seconds. While Thundershock EMP grenades and Nova grenades disabled alien technology at range, shutting down the advanced systems that gave races like the Tau their edge. Electromagnetic scanners and prediction devices, tools that used otherwise lost branches of technology, tracked alien movements across sectors before they could reach Imperial worlds. The weapons alone would have made the Watch dangerous, but what set them apart from every other fighting force in the Imperium was their willingness to use the enemy's own creations against them. Beyond weaponry, the Watch actively recovers and adapts alien technology. It is long-standing doctrine to retrieve examples of Xenos engineering so that inquisitorial specialists can study it, In Deathwatch, Tech Marines assess whether captured equipment presents a danger and plan how to neutralize or adapt it. One result is the masking screen, a cloaking device based on captured Tau stealth field generators. Though the Adeptus Mechanicus could not fully remove the alien influence, they created a functional version for covert operations, and the Watch also developed additional active camouflage systems beyond the masking screen, equipping operatives with technology that rendered them nearly invisible to both organic senses and electronic detection. Other recovered items include modified Tau rifles, Necron phase blades adapted for human use, Eldar skulls repurposed as servo skulls, and even Tyranid body parts fashioned into weapons and tools. The Watch gives these items new names to disguise their alien origins, calling a captured Tau weapon something like Eastern Fringe Artillery, as though the name change makes it acceptable. The reliance on alien-driven technology went beyond weapons and battlefield tools. Watch Fortress staff, including non-combat construction and security personnel, were issued adapted Tau technologies for daily operations, and purpose-built hacking modules designed to break into Tau encryption systems were standard equipment for intelligence operations. The Watch even maintained Eldar hexagraph orbs for psychic mapping, artifacts so far removed from anything the Adeptus Mechanicus would approve that their very presence in an Imperial facility would have triggered an investigation anywhere else. And the Watch did not just collect alien technology. It built an entire doctrine around thinking the way the alien thinks, a practice that most Space Marines would call forbidden. The novel Storm of Damocles shows this doctrine in action during the Damocles Gulf conflict. Watch Commander Jotun taught his warriors to think like the Xenos, to know what they were thinking, to understand their logic, even though their thoughts were illogical. He defined the worst kind of failure not as spiritual corruption, but as the failure to outthink, outreason, and outgas the alien. His fortress housed the Oubliette, described as a prison and a safe where the Watch kept alien specimens that refused to die, including a living Nisisar, a race allied with the Tau, kept in captivity despite the fact that its psychic tendrils could plant false memories in nearby human minds. The fortress's great hall served as a museum of alien death, displaying Eldar swords, low shadow claws, and stripped jawbone of a Carnifex Prime, each artifact treated as a lesson for the Watch. After raiding a Tau emissary craft, the Watch extracted reams of Tau information from captured databanks, combining alien star charts with Imperial ones to track enemy fleet movements weeks before they arrived. A librarian used a gold-plated simian skull, an artifact from a Mortifactor brother, to experience the final memories of a dead Marine, a ritual that identified the Tau Storm Surge battlesuit as a threat before it ever reached a main battlefield. In a galaxy where information travels slowly and arrives too late, the Watch trades purity for foresight, and that trade saves lives. The Tau, for their part, had their own approach to understanding the enemy, and it stood as a mirror image of the Imperium's methods. An Imperial crewman named Arctan Bellis, captured during the Damocles Gulf conflict, experienced the Tau approach to conversion firsthand, where the Imperium used hypno-conditioning and the threat of death to reshape its warriors. The Tau offered rehabilitation, education, and a vision of a greater good that gave even prisoners of war a sense of purpose. The crewman was subjected to a gentle but persistent reshaping that sought to convince him that his entire life under Imperial rule had been one of needless suffering. The contrast highlighted an important truth about the Watch. It was not just an alien hunting force, but a philosophical statement that understanding the enemy was only valuable when it led to more efficient killing. The Tau understood the enemy too, but they sought to absorb. Meanwhile, the Watch sought only to annihilate. However, the deeper this knowledge went, the more it collided with everything the Imperium claimed to stand for. The most extreme example came from the source Shadowbreaker, where Inquisitor Epsilon entered a formal alliance with the Tau Firecaste to conduct Project Blackseed, a joint research program aimed at finding a weapon against the Tyranids. The project involved studying alien gene stealer hybrids and using a Geller field generator to isolate specimens from the hive mind. When challenged on whether this crossed the line into a crime against the faith, the Inquisitor's response was blunt. The Inquisition decides what is and is not a crime. The same novel published how Codicir Karas was saved from near-fatal wounds by an Eldar healing machine stored within a watch fortress. The device rebuilt his body so perfectly that he emerged physically stronger than before, but the experience left him feeling spiritually dirty, even as the Xeno device collapsed and dissolved atom by atom after completing its work. The cost of carrying this knowledge fell heaviest on the individual Marine, and the consequences lasted far longer than any single mission. Lord Inquisitor Cryptman ordered his kill team to capture gene stealers alive, a command viewed as unthinkable by traditional Marines who believed the only acceptable response to the alien was destruction. He used those specimens to lure High Fleet Leviathan into Orcal space, a strategy that was effective but devastating, and the Inquisition eventually cast him out for the collateral damage his methods caused. A high-ranking Imperial Navy officer confronted the watch captain directly, accusing the Deathwatch of creating a wasteland and calling it peace. The individual Marine's burden was managed through a system of internal surveillance and absolute secrecy, and even that system carried a threat of death. The oath they had already sworn forbade sharing anything they learned, even with their own chapter brothers. And for those who went deepest into forbidden study, the Watcher Protocol served as a final safeguard. Teams often included warriors like Roth, whose secret role was to monitor his teammates and execute any Marine, especially Psychers, who showed that their expertise had tipped into corruption. The Exorcist shadowed Karas constantly, not out of brotherhood, but as an executioner waiting for a reason. For Watch Masters, the price of knowledge was permanent exile, because they carried so much sensitive strategic information and held such deep access to inquisitorial archives that they were rarely allowed to return to their original brotherhoods. They carried this burden alone for years at a time, becoming permanent parts of the inquisitorial defense network. The knowledge that made them the Imperium's greatest defense against the alien was the same knowledge that separated them from everything they once were. And as the Watch's warriors would soon discover, the forbidden knowledge and alien expertise were only part of what their service cost them. The Watch had its warriors, its weapons, and its forbidden knowledge, everything it needed to fight the alien. But none of that changed the one truth that every Marine learned the moment he arrived, because the Inquisition did not see him as a hero. A standard Space Marine is built to last centuries. He stands as a living symbol of the Emperor's will, a warrior whose name is carved into the honor rolls of his chapter, and whose gene seed is recovered after death to create the next generation of heroes. His legacy is meant to be eternal, and he is remembered. But in the Deathwatch, that promise is broken, because service in the Long Vigil takes the legendary, immortal Astartes and turns him into something the Imperium treats very differently. A high-value, specialized, and ultimately disposable tool whose name may never be spoken aloud again. The statistics tell the story before anything else does. In the novel Deathwatch, the warriors of Talon Squad believed it was a well-known and grim fact that only 1 in 20 ever returned alive to their parent chapter. Whether the number was precise or simply the way Marines made sense of how few came home, the belief shaped how every warrior in the Watch understood his odds. That number means that for every 20 warriors who put on the black, 19 died in missions that their home brothers would never fully understand. Most who fell were never recovered, and even when a body was retrieved, the gene seed was often ruined or lost during high-risk operations deep in enemy territory. These brothers died surrounded not by their own but by strangers from other worlds, and their deaths were recorded only in encrypted scrolls that offered few answers to anyone outside the Inquisition. The Ordos were blunt about this reality. Inquisitor Sigma, the handler assigned to Talon's squad, viewed Space Marines with cold distance. He told the team that they were tools, not heroes. He called them assets and an armored fist, and he made no secret of his willingness to spend their lives. To Inquisitors like Sigma, a Deathwatch Marine was not a legend but a resource to be used up. Not every handler saw them this way, but the system was built to work as though they did. To ensure these assets remained under control, the Ordos employed tools that would be unthinkable in any standard brotherhood. As revealed in the novels, armor locks and neural interrupters were physical safety measures built into Deathwatch power armor that allowed inquisitorial handlers to shut down a Marine's body if he became a liability or challenged their authority. These were not emergency measures locked in a vault, but control mechanisms that treated the superhuman warrior as a piece of equipment that could be switched off. Whether every watch fortress used them or only certain Inquisitors demanded them, their existence revealed how far the Ordos were willing to go to maintain control over warriors they did not fully trust. The Inquisition gave the Watch the best weapons, the best intelligence, and the best training in the Imperium, and in return it kept a kill switch wired into their armor at all times. The reasons chapters agreed to send their best warriors into this system were not always honorable. The most commonly cited motivation was duty, since brotherhoods were bound by ancient, terrible oaths and formal agreements. Nominating a brother for the Watch was considered a great honor, even if that honor was paid with the brother's life. Some chapters viewed the appointment with genuine pride, and the Crimson Fists, Imperial Fists, and Ultramarines treated service as a mark of distinction, while the Dark Angels added one more layer of silence on top of the secrecy that had already defined the long vigil. But honor was not always the reason. Captain Shrike of the Raven Guard used the transfer as a convenient and easy path to rid himself of Zephyr Seed, a rebellious, arrogant Marine, whose growing legend threatened his authority. In the Storm of Damocles, last Leonis of the Black Consuls was sent to the Watch as direct punishment for conducting an unauthorized personal vendetta against a war-bearer traitor. For the Space Wolves, who felt deeply uneasy when separated from their packmates, being sent halfway across the galaxy to serve among strangers was less of an honor and more of a wound, and some chapters simply used the system to get rid of Marines they didn't like. A warrior might be a brilliant fighter, but such an impossible personality that his commanders were happy to see him leave, and the result was the same. The Marine arrived at the Watch Fortress alone, and whatever the reason for his selection, he was now the Inquisition's tool. Others arrived having already lost everything. The Black Shields were warriors who appeared at the Watch Fortress gates with every trace of their chapter identity scraped from their armor. They bore no markings, no name, and no history, and many were the last loyal survivors of traitor brotherhoods who would be instantly executed anywhere else. Each one sought a nameless death to prove their loyalty one final time, because when a Black Shield entered the Watch, his service was always for life, and these warriors often carried a dark acceptance of death, fighting as though every alien they killed absolved an unnamed sin. Some of their stories were tragic, and others were stranger than anything the Watch had ever seen. A former son of Medusa, known as Mortifax, had led 7 kill teams into a Tau trap in the Webway. As the sole survivor, he painted over all traces of his former chapter and changed his name to symbolize his shame. A Deathwatch dreadnought, known only as Nihilus, served as a Black Shield whose true name was known by a single tech marine who had long since died. He changed his identity to remain anonymous, and though the organization did not favor such mysteries, he was respected by all because in battle he was unstoppable. Not every Black Shield earned that respect. Watch Commander Israfil, one of the highest-ranking Black Shields in the organization's history, died unknown and forgotten. His body was never recovered, even when substantial chapter forces intervened in the aftermath of the engagement that killed him. And for a warrior who commanded an entire watch fortress, his end was indistinguishable from that of the lowest-ranked battle brother lost on a routine patrol. Perhaps the most famous Black Shield in recent history was the former captain teased at the start of this video, Titus of the Ultramarine 2nd Company. After being falsely accused of corruption by a battle brother named Leandros and handed over to the Inquisition following the events on Graia, he was stripped of his rank and subjected to over a century of interrogation. When he was finally clear, the damage had been done and his old life was gone. He entered the Watch as a Black Shield, scraping his ultramarine colors from his armor and burying his identity beneath the black. For years, the former captain fought as one of the Watch's most effective operatives, his combat brilliance and stubborn refusal to die making him invaluable in engagements across multiple sectors. During a critical campaign against Tyranid and Chaos forces, he proved himself so thoroughly that he drew the attention of Chief Librarian Tigurius of the Ultramarines, one of the most powerful psychers in the Imperium. The Chief Librarian tracked him down and personally oversaw his return to the chapter that had once abandoned him. Titus then crossed the Rubicon Primaris, undergoing the dangerous surgical procedure to become a Primaris Marine, and was reinstated as a lieutenant of the Ultramarines. His story was one of the only cases where a Black Shield not only survived the Deathwatch but emerged from it stronger, reclaiming both his identity and his place in the original Brotherhood. The Lamentors chapter provided one of the most tragic examples in the Watch's entire history. A dreadnought from this Blood Angel's successor was sent to serve because of his impressive record against Tyranids. But while on duty, the ancient warrior was informed that all contact had been lost with his entire Brotherhood following an encounter with a Tyranid hive fleet. Believing all his brothers to be dead, the dreadnought may well be the last Lamentor alive. He constantly yearned for death so that he might join his lost brothers, but the Lamentor's terrible luck meant that the one thing he wished for most likely would never come. But even for warriors who had not lost everything, the missions themselves made the odds clear. The expendability was not just a statistic, but a reality they lived through. Talon was deployed to a world where Karas was forced to split his brothers, using 3 of them as bait to draw a Genestealer swarm, while he recovered the primary objective. The Marines were placed in a role nearly identical to the gun servitors deployed alongside them, both serving as expendable elements in the Inquisition's plan. Operations often involved one-way deployments where a squad teleported directly into a dangerous site carrying explosives, knowing that extraction was not guaranteed. Not every operation involved a kill team. The Watch also deployed what were known as kill Marines, lone operatives sent to accomplish objectives that a full squad could not reach without detection. These warriors operated entirely alone, deep behind enemy lines, carrying out assassinations, sabotage, and intelligence gathering, without any support or extraction plan. A kill Marine was the purest expression of the Watch's expendability doctrine, a single warrior armed with the Watch's best technology, sent to achieve a specific objective with the understanding that he probably would not return. The losses that followed proved just how routine this kind of sacrifice had become. The Storm of Damocles novel opened with the total loss of 2 entire kill teams, Primaris and Orion, during a routine scouting mission. When Captain Nergi investigated, he found no bodies, only scraps and shoulder pads. Warriors who could have been chapter captains vanished without a trace, and the Codex Deathwatch documents Watchmaster Valesnas and his brothers at Fort Starshield choosing a selfless strike against the Wog of Gazkul Thraka, knowing they were impossibly outmatched. He hoped that killing the warlord would give his death and those of his brothers meaning, but months later reinforcements arrived and found nothing but drifting wreckage. The Watchmaster's body and those of his closest brothers had been pinned to the remains of their own fortress with massive scrap metal spikes, and each warrior's chestplate had been torn away. On their flesh, the personal glyph of the warlord himself had been branded. The politics of expendability operated within the Watch as well as above it. At the Battle of Black Gulch, Watch Captain Holyar reserved the glorious missions of his veteran squads while assigning the worst duties to warriors he considered less valuable. And the entire company was nearly annihilated when his favorites were overwhelmed by a threat the less favored teams might have handled differently. Even inside the Watch, where every Marine was supposed to be equal in the black, commanders played favorites with lives, and the cost was measured in bodies. Kill Team Altrean triggered a viral warhead to prevent the Drukhari from capturing forbidden genetic material, sacrificing themselves without hesitation. The Omega Vault, the ancient mechanism at the heart of Watch Fortress Ariok, sometimes served as the instrument of this expendability. It did not merely provide weapons and intelligence, because on occasion it dispatched kill teams into certain death, never to return, sending warriors to recover ancient artifacts or cryptic data from locations where survival was not part of the equation. The Vault did not explain its reasoning or offer alternatives. It opened, issued its directive, and the warriors went, knowing that the mechanism that had chosen them had also written them off. The Watch even created a ritual to turn this disposal into something sacred. At Pickett's Watch, the names of fallen brothers were carved into blocks of lead and dropped into a pot of molten steel. The blocks were melted down and recast into hundreds of shells, and each surviving Marine then drew a handful of those rounds to use in the next battle, literally spending the legacy of their dead brothers as bullets. In the Watch, even a ritual of remembrance was designed to turn a dead hero into something useful. The Codex also describes a piece of equipment that took this principle to its most disturbing end. The Redemptor Dreadnought is a variant whose reactors are so powerful that they slowly burn away the heroic pilot sealed within. Unlike a standard dreadnought that preserves a warrior for eternity, the Redemptor consumed its pilot until his physical form was a destroyed wreck, and at that point the spent remains were extracted and replaced by the next volunteer. But the legendary warrior did not rest inside the machine. He was used up by it. The way the Watch's human staff treated these transhuman warriors sharpened the point further. Shipmaster Loney Farrell, a mortal, looked at Space Marines with a mean and suspicious eye. When the captain returned bleeding from injuries, she told him flatly that he should have put his helmet on, treating the superhuman soldier not as a holy icon but as faulty equipment that made a preventable error. Even the humans in the Watch had stopped pretending that Space Marines could not be killed. The willingness to spend lives reached its most disturbing form when Nergi lied to his own Gene brother, Bat-Bayar Khan of the White Scars, about the presence of Commander Shadowsun. He did this to manipulate an entire company of his own bloodline into serving a Deathwatch objective they were not permitted to understand, because in the Watch the mission came before blood, before honor, and before truth. For the warriors trapped in this system, the odds had already answered whether they would survive. The real question for the rare few who did make it through was far more painful. The rare Deathwatch veteran who survived his service faced a problem that no amount of training could prepare him for. He could not talk about where he had been, what he had done, or what he had seen, because he carried knowledge that his own brotherhood considered spiritually dangerous, and he had spent years trusting warriors from rival chapters more than his own Gene brothers. The Watch did not just borrow a Marine's body, but reshaped his mind, and the warrior who came home, if he came home at all, was never the same person who left. When a fallen brother's body was returned, the process was cold and left more gaps than it filled. In the Deathwatch core rulebook, the Death Spectres received a fallen warrior with a ceremony of sorrow and respect, involving the entire company in full armor. The body arrived with an encrypted scroll from the chapter master, a document that offered few answers about how the warrior died or what he was fighting when he fell. And if a battle brother fell before his sworn term was served, tradition required that his home chapter send a replacement of equal merit, maintaining a permanent cost in lives that some brotherhoods could barely keep up with. The rituals surrounding departure told their own story, because different chapters handled the departure in their own ways, and each tradition reflected how seriously the brotherhood took the odds of survival. Storm Wardens assembled the entire chapter to salute a departing brother, treating the ceremony as a funeral for the living because they did not expect him to return. Black Templars marked the event with all-night silent vigils, kneeling in prayer, viewing the Marine's absence as a spiritual trial. Space Wolves held feasts and broke open their drink stores, though the spoken goal of returning to the great halls of their homeworld was rarely achieved. And the Ultramarines gathered as much of the company as possible to see the brother off in a formal ceremony, while Dark Angels sent their departing brother away under an oath of secrecy, reminding him to keep hidden truths hidden. Regardless of the chapter, the occasion was heavy, because everyone present knew the battle brother would likely never return. But for the rare few who made it back alive, the real cost of the long vigil was only beginning. For those who did survive, the oath created a permanent barrier between the veteran and everyone he once knew. He was forbidden even from sharing secrets with the brothers of his own parent chapter unless they too had served the long vigil. And by ancient custom, those who wore the silver shoulder plate were never questioned about their service. This silence was not just a matter of honor, but was enforced through inquisitorial conditioning, since the Watch used hypno-induction to change the very way a Marine thought, ensuring that he was Deathwatch first and a chapter second for the duration of his service. But the effects did not vanish when the service ended. Karas acknowledged that the Watch shapes a warrior to fit its specific needs, creating what the novel describes as a permanent shift in identity, one that meant he would never see things as he once did upon returning home. Chiron observed that the librarian came back from his missions with new shadows in his eyes, shadows that represented the weight of forbidden knowledge, encounters with alien technology, and dealings that standard Astartes were taught to treat as corruption. The short story Onyx showed this psychological reshaping in action. The squad captured Homunculus, a Dark Eldar fleshcrafter, but was ordered by their inquisitorial handler to leave hundreds of human prisoners behind to be harvested by the Xenos, because nothing will be allowed to risk the primary mission. Ingvar, a space wolf, noted that this cold thinking made him feel sick to his stomach. This was the kind of memory a veteran carried home. Not just the battles, but the moments when the Inquisition ordered him to stand by while innocents were slaughtered for a greater purpose that he was not allowed to question. The companion story, Whiteout, reinforced this tension, because the Space Wolf found that his brothers in the Watch seemed bloodless compared to the fierce warriors he grew up with on Fenris. They lacked the rage and heart that he considered basic to what a warrior should be, and the inquisitorial approach to warfare, precise, clinical, and willing to sacrifice anything for the objective, felt alien to him. But the conditioning had already done its work. He had been reshaped, and even if he returned to the Sons of Rus, he would bring that clinical perspective with him, a perspective that his brothers might not understand or trust. When the veteran arrived home, the reception was rarely warm. Some chapters greeted returning warriors not with celebration but with suspicion, since the white scars were known to subject returning veterans to blood tests performed by an apothecary, checking to ensure their gene seed had not been corrupted by dealings with the Ordo Xenos. The veteran had spent years studying aliens and using technology his home brotherhood might consider outright forbidden, and his brothers knew this even if they could not prove it. The silence imposed by the oath only deepened their distrust. The veteran who did return often continued to wear the silver shoulder plate as a mark of honor, but that same mark identified him as an outsider to his peers, because he carried knowledge they did not. He had served alongside warriors they might view as enemies and used weapons his brothers would call forbidden. Despite this suspicion, Deathwatch veterans were often promoted. Survivors were judged the best candidates for captaincies and even chapter master positions, because their service among the apex predators of other brotherhoods had tempered them in ways standard service could not match. A Marine who had spent years leading warriors from a dozen different traditions developed leadership abilities that standard chapter service rarely produced. In the novel, Karas was viewed by his brotherhood as the Kadash, a figure of prophetic importance, but this status isolated him rather than elevated him, because his role as a symbol of hope was also a burden that separated him from the simple and pure life of a warrior. But promotion did not equal trust. A returning veteran brought a Deathwatch first perspective that could clash directly with his Brotherhood's traditional culture, and service created a split in loyalty between the Marine's oath to his chapter and his bond with the Inquisition. He had spent years trusting rivals and relying on warriors from chapters his brothers viewed with suspicion, and that experience changed how he led, how he fought, and how he saw the Imperium itself. The rulebook spelled out exactly where this friction came from. Deathwatch duties regularly required warriors to act in direct violation of the Codex Astartes, the document that governed nearly every aspect of how a standard chapter fought, organized, and thought. A veteran who had spent years operating outside these rules, making decisions the Codex would never permit, and relying on warriors from chapters his own Brotherhood considered enemies, did not simply snap back to his old way of thinking when he returned home. The habits he had built in the Watch, the willingness to bend doctrine, to trust outsiders, to place the Inquisition's objectives above his chapter's traditions were now part of who he was. His brothers followed the Codex because it was sacred, but he had learned to ignore it because the mission demanded it. That gap between how he saw the rules and how his chapter saw them was not something a ceremony or a promotion could fix, because it was a permanent crack in the foundation of his loyalty, and both sides knew it was there. The damage extended beyond the individual, because Deathwatch service deepened the tensions between chapters rather than healing them. Ingvar's frustration with the bloodless approach of his ultramarine teammate Callimachus mirrored the broader friction between the Space Wolves' warrior culture and the ultramarines' disciplined methodology. These tensions, already centuries old, were sharpened by the Watch experience rather than softened, and the ultramarine enforced the inquisitorial rule that the system's authorities must not know we were here, a mindset that clashed directly with the Astartes' traditional role as visible symbols of imperial might. When these warriors returned to their chapters carrying opposing perspectives, the friction followed them home. Following the Great Rift and the Indomitus Crusade, the tensions around returning veterans took on a new dimension as Primaris Marines entered the Watch for the first time. Not every veteran welcomed the newcomers, and one Watch captain received reinforcements in the form of a Primaris kill team and, distrusting the untested warriors, sent them on the most dangerous and humiliating missions while saving the better operations for his veteran teams. When his own squads were trapped and overwhelmed by Orks, the Primaris warriors he had mistreated came to his rescue, and the humbled Watch captain spent 10 years voluntarily serving as an ordinary battle brother under the command of the Primaris sergeant he had once looked down on. The tensions with the newcomers were real, but they were nothing compared to the weight of what the Watch demanded from every veteran who tried to leave. The secrecy that defined the Watch did not loosen when a veteran's service ended, but tightened. The organization divided its knowledge so aggressively that even assigned Marines serving inside a Watch fortress were not told its exact coordinates. Only those pledged to lifelong service were trusted with that information, so a warrior who had spent years fighting beside brothers from a dozen chapters, carrying weapons derived from alien technology, and executing missions under inquisitorial authority was then sent home and told to say nothing about any of it. The oath of binding did not expire but followed the veteran for the rest of his life, a permanent seal over everything he had learned, everything he had done, and everything he had become. Those constraints did not vanish when the service ended, because the returning veteran was bound by the nature of his service and by oaths that the Ordo Xenos enforced with the full weight of the Inquisition behind them. If a brother spoke too freely, if he shared forbidden knowledge with warriors who had not served the long vigil, the consequences were not administrative but terminal, because the Watch did not simply ask for silence. They owned it. For the vast majority of returning veterans, there was no dramatic reinstatement, only the slow realization that the brother who came home was not the brother who left, and that the chapter receiving him could sense the difference even when it could not name it. The Watch reshaped warriors so completely that even those who survived and returned carried an invisible mark, not in their armor but in the way they thought, the way they led, and the way they saw the Imperium itself. That mark never faded, because it was the long vigil's final cost. paid not in blood but in belonging. And even that was not the full price, because every warrior who never came home took something irreplaceable with him. The genetic cost was severe. When a brother fell in the Watch, his parent chapter relied entirely on Deathwatch apothecaries to recover and return his gene seed. And if the apothecary failed, which in the high-risk environments the Watch operated in was common, that Marine's genetic line was lost to the chapter forever. The growing drain on the Imperium's rarest warriors was real, because every death cost the chapter not just one veteran, but the replacement they had to send, and the genetic future that might never be recovered. The drain was not limited to gene seed. Every veteran who died in the Watch took with him decades of accumulated combat experience, knowledge of alien species that no training program could replicate, and relationships with warriors from other chapters that had taken years to build. A kill team that lost its alpha did not simply promote the next brother in line, but lost the specific combination of trust, shared memory, and battlefield instinct that had made that particular squad effective. Replacing a fallen Deathwatch veteran was not like replacing a fallen Marine, because the chapter sent a new body, but the Watch lost something that could not be rebuilt. The investment in conditioning, forbidden knowledge, and cross-chapter integration that had been poured into the dead warrior was gone, and the process had to begin again, from nothing with his replacement. This was the hidden math of the oath-sworn tithe. Every death cost double, once for the warrior, and once for everything the Watch had made him into. And for some, the return never came at all. Watchmasters who rose to the highest ranks carried too many secrets, held too much forbidden knowledge, and served too great a strategic importance to ever walk the halls of their home chapter again. So they died in permanent exile. For those sealed inside dreadnoughts, the situation was even more final, because their long vigil will never end, meaning they remained in service for as long as the machine kept them alive, which could be centuries or millennia. In the depths of Watch Fortress Ariok, the insignia of more than 100 Space Marine chapters are displayed, including those that no longer exist, a silent record of the cost paid over 10,000 years. The Watch stripped away the eternal warrior ideal and replaced it with something colder. Yet, despite all these costs, despite the 19 who died for everyone who returned, the Imperium continued to demand its warriors. Every political control, forced cooperation, forbidden knowledge, expendable lives, and broken warriors adds up to a single unavoidable truth. The Imperium tolerates all of it because the alternative is extinction. Almost every principle the Imperium claims to hold sacred is violated by the Deathwatch. It studies the alien instead of simply destroying it, and it uses technology the Adeptus Mechanicus considers forbidden. Space Marines are treated as disposable tools rather than eternal symbols, and the level of secrecy makes accountability impossible. And none of that matters because without the Watch, entire alien threats would go unanswered, and worlds would fall before anyone even understood what was attacking them. The standard military arms of the Imperium are not built for the kind of war the Watch fights. As detailed in the Xenos Hunters anthology, Watch Captain Ska Mordentot observed that the Imperial Navy is too weak to act, and the Imperial Guard is too slow in dealing with fast-moving or technologically advanced alien threats. A full Imperial crusade might eventually grind down an Ork empire, but by the time the fleets were assembled and deployed, entire worlds were consumed, and the enemy had moved on to the next target. Brother Captain Artemis argued that a kill team could remove the leadership of an alien force in hours, causing the entire war machine to collapse from within, achieving what a crusade would take decades to accomplish. As described earlier, the Chamber Militant designation was not ceremonial, because it meant the Watch had access to the Inquisition's intelligence networks, its political authority, and its freedom to operate outside normal Imperial law. Where a standard chapter had to position the administratum for permission to deploy, the Watch could strike on the word of a single Inquisitor. In practice, this gave the Watch something no other Space Marine force possessed: the legal authority to fight a secret war against alien threats before they arrived, threats the rest of the Imperium did not even know existed. But the results spoke for themselves. The assassination of the Overfiend of Octarius threw the entire greenskin horde into chaos, and without the Watch, that force would have continued sweeping through the sector until a full crusade could be organized, one that might not have arrived in time. Watchmaster Ashurbanipal justified the exterminatus of the entire Kerbinola system, killing billions of loyal citizens, as a necessary duty performed to deny biomass to the Tyranids and prevent the genocide of 1,000 times their number. Officially, the Watch blamed the alien for that destruction to keep public support, hiding the fact that the Inquisition itself had given the order. Strategic victories extended across every type of alien threat the Imperium had ever faced. As published in the Codex supplement Deathwatch, Kill Team Cassius uncovered a gene-stealer contamination on Gosar Quintus that had corrupted an entire mining world's ruling dynasty, stopping the rot before it spread. Additional gene-stealer cult purges followed across dozens of worlds as the Watch tracked the spread of infection outward from every confirmed site, hunting the cults to extinction before they could summon the hive fleets. But the cults were not the only alien threat hiding in plain sight, because some had dug so deep into Imperial society that only the Watch could find them. During the siege of Saints Hall, the Watch coordinated sabotage operations against Tau shield generators and air superiority strikes that turned the alien forces and their cultist allies against each other, breaking a blockade that threatened a shrine world of billions. A single kill team destroyed a colossal Ark Factorum at Betaphon, preventing tons of Imperial munitions from falling into greenskin hands. And on Kalast's Haim, the Watch was the only force capable of seeing through a Jukari ruse, materializing to slaughter the Xeno forces raiding the southern districts while the Imperial Guard defended the north. A dozen kill teams once responded to a warning from the Grey Knights about an Ork warlord on the world of Indash who had spilled so much blood that the violence threatened to tear a hole in reality and allow the demons of the Blood God to flood through. The Watch deployed and killed the warlord and his entire bodyguard using only thunderhammers, heavy batons, and armored fists, crushing the enemy to death with blunt weapons that limited the blood spill. The tactic cost half their number, but it prevented the warp breach from ever opening. Against less physically imposing enemies, the Watch proved just as deadly, but the tactics were entirely different, because outsmarting races that could predict the future required a level of deception that most space marines would never consider. When Eldar Corsairs raided a Watch fortress seeking a powerful artifact called the Doomsday Sphere, they discovered too late that the artifact had never existed, because the entire story had been planted by Black Shields through hired contacts, luring hundreds of Corsair raiders into an ambush where they were killed before they ever reached the supposed treasure vault. Their most significant victory against this ancient race came at the Crystal Sands of Coheria, where Watch Captain Artemis led a strike that disrupted a ritual conducted by Eldrad Ulthrin, the most powerful Farseer in the galaxy. The Seer had been attempting to awaken Iniad, a god of the dead whose birth could have reshaped the balance of power across the entire galaxy, and the kill team shattered the ritual before it could be completed. It was the single most important mission any Deathwatch operative could have ever carried out, and it proved that even the gods of alien races were not beyond their reach. The novel Storms of Damocles provided one of the most detailed accounts of the organization's value during the Damocles Gulf conflict. Kill teams Faith and Zeal infiltrated a Tau training facility and massacred over 100 cadets, robbing the enemy of an entire generation of trained battlesuit pilots. Watch Commander Jotun personally tracked and killed an Ethereal, an assassination that cut the head off local Xenos leadership. At the Kandashi icefields, Fortis kill teams closed on the enemy aboard repulsor tanks, whose grav waves shattered the frozen landscape, and by the time the Tau realized the danger, their towering storm surge walkers had fallen through the collapsing surface and drowned beneath the ice. But not every enemy could be outsmarted with ground and technology, because the Tyranids fought with a collective intelligence that adapted faster than any weapon could counter. Against the Tyranids, The Watch forced two alien empires to fight each other, instead of the Imperium, by seeding Ork-held space with captured gene-stealer swarms. In one engagement, kill teams observed a Mechanicus device that broke Tyranid hive mind control, watched an Ork warlord use it to shatter swarm after swarm, waited for both alien armies to destroy each other, then rushed in, took the warlord's head along with the device, and escaped for further study. The worst of those threats came from a crisis the Watch itself had helped create. Cryptman's plan, described earlier, had not stayed contained, because the Tyranids fed on Ork biomass and evolved from it, growing stronger with every battle, while the Orks thrived on the endless fighting and bred larger and more dangerous war leaders. Eventually, both sides broke out of the war zone and spilled into neighboring Imperial systems, and what had been designed as a controlled burn became a wildfire. Something deeply troubling was also noted about the Tyranid splinter fleets that had passed through the Great Rift. The warp corrupts everything it touches, and humans, machines, and even space marines can be twisted beyond recognition by exposure to its energy. But the Tyranid organisms that traveled through the rift came out on the other side completely unchanged. The warp had no effect on them at all. For a force dedicated to understanding the alien, this was one of the most alarming observations ever recorded, because it meant the Tyranids operated outside the rules that governed every other threat in the galaxy. Against the Necrons, the Watch faced an enemy that simply would not stay dead. Their de-revenant ammunition broke down reanimation protocols, and their xenophase blades cut right through the ancient machine's defenses. When the Necrons began awakening across the galaxy at an increasing pace, it was the Watch's accumulated knowledge of tomb sites that allowed the Imperium to respond before entire Forge worlds were lost. In one of their greatest triumphs, a massed Deathwatch force managed to destroy a Catan fragment, a piece of the star gods that even their creators worshipped. A victory so significant that it proved the Watch could challenge threats that not even the metallic horrors themselves could control. The Drukhari presented a different kind of challenge, because the Watch conducted operations inside the dark city of Camorra itself. After learning through free trader contacts that a space marine captain was being held in the bloodsport arenas, a kill team found a way into the webway by smuggling their Corvus Blackstar inside the damaged shell of a Corsair starship, fought into the arena's holding pens, freed the captured captain, and escaped before the trap could close. One of the galaxy's most mysterious alien races, the Rudd, forced the Watch to fight through their time-bending tunnel networks. 2 Watch companies joined the fight, accompanied by a strike force of 8 dreadnoughts. These ancient warriors led the final assault on the Rudd network, enduring the creature's age-draining presence long enough to slaughter their leaders and collapse their tunnels. But when the dreadnoughts were recovered, they were found to be rusted and lifeless, their biological remains reduced to nothing but dust, consumed by the Rudd's time-bending field and the span it took to win the battle. And sometimes the threats the Watch uncovered did not fit neatly into any category, because the line between alien and traitor was thinner than anyone wanted to admit. The Watch even crossed paths with threats born not from alien biology but from humanity's own corruption. A kill team encountered Fabius Bile, the infamous Chaos medic and body modifier, during a raid on one of his laboratories. The traitor had been experimenting with alien genetic material, blending human and Xenos biology into monsters that broke every known classification. Sometimes the opposite happened. On the Imperial world of Astra Carla, the Watch mercilessly killed Eldari forces that had arrived as potential allies against a shared Chaos enemy, destroying both Imperial-aligned sides and handing victories to the traitors. The incident showed that the Watch's greatest strength, its absolute commitment to destroying the alien, could become its most devastating weakness when applied without context. The warriors and their formations were devastating, but the vehicles and ships that carried them pushed Imperial technology to its absolute limit. Their air operations relied on the Corvus Blackstar, a hidden gunship carrying twin assault cannons, air-to-air missiles, and laser cannons. For operations requiring the total destruction of a world, the Watch maintained a group of kill ships equipped with Dark Age invisibility technology that made them undetectable to every known form of scanning. These kill ships carried exterminatus-grade weapons, and rumors within the Watch suggested that their numbers were enough to destroy every populated world in the Jericho Reach if the order were ever given. However, the victories came at a price that went beyond lives. Because to succeed, the Watch routinely violated the core principles of Imperial faith and Astartes' honor. The Catechism of the Xeno commanded that the alien be hated and destroyed, but Watch doctrine taught that to kill your enemy, you must understand your enemy. As documented in the Codex Imperial Agents, Deathwatch kill teams and their leaders were formally listed within the Inquisitorial Order of Battle. This was not an old agreement that had been forgotten, but was active, current, and strengthened with every new edition of Imperial military law. Survival of the Watch was not a matter of tradition or goodwill, but was built into the structure of the Imperium itself, and the Inquisition made sure it stayed that way. The Inquisition occasionally pushed this arrangement even further, into territory that even the Watch's warriors struggled to accept. Cryptmen being cast out, Epsilon's alliance with the Tau, Nergi's deception of his own Gene brother, Mordentat's use of his squad as unknowing bait. Each one demonstrated the same truth. The Watch did not just break Imperial ideals in its dealings with the aliens, but broke them in its dealings with everyone, including its own warriors. In every source agreed on one thing: if the Watch were dissolved, the Imperium would have no replacement. The supplement states this directly: the Imperium would surely be lost. Without the Watch fortresses and their sealed vaults of forbidden lore, the Imperium would be blind to the evolving biology and tactics of alien threats. Standard chapters were too bound by the Codex Astartes and their own narrow boundaries to coordinate the cross-chapter expertise that modern alien warfare demanded, and no other institution possessed the specialized rounds, the alien-derived weapons, the forbidden knowledge, or the willingness to break the rules. Jotun observed that countless hidden alien sites were planning the destruction of mankind at that very moment, while Nergi realized that while his Gene brother sought glory in poems, he had to stay in the darkness, wearing black armor to do the hidden, thankless work that ensured there was a future left for anyone at all. The ritual of casting was not just a ceremony, but the organization's philosophy made physical. Every warrior was a resource to be spent, and even in death they served. Without the Watch fortresses and their constant watch, the Emperor's worlds would fall one by one, taken by alien forces that no one else was equipped to stop. The Deathwatch endured because the Imperium could not survive without them, even if it could not fully control them. As Watch Master Danash stated in the final record available to the Ordo Xenos, the Deathwatch was the shield that held the monsters at bay, and that shield would hold for as long as warriors were willing to carry its weight, because in a galaxy of endless war, the long vigil would never end. But no warrior embodied the cost, the sacrifice, and the survival of the Deathwatch more than the former Ultramarines captain we followed through this video. Demetrian Titus spent over a century inside this system, from his betrayal on Graia to his years of interrogation, his service as a nameless Black Shield, and his impossible return to the chapter that abandoned him. His full story is covered in our video on the entire life of Captain Titus. Watch it now.